Welcome back, friends. Today, again, we'll be reading the nonfiction infotext article called The Atomic Bomb. And this nonfiction article will help build our schema for when we start to read next week Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. Before we start reading, let's review what we already have in our schema about World War II. As a reminder, friends, we live in this continent, North America, in the country, the United States of America. We know now that Hitler and the Nazis were taking over many countries in Europe. We also read earlier in the week that Japan was another country that was involved in World War II. And when they bombed Pearl Harbor in the United States and North America, that's what got the United States involved in the war. Again, from earlier this week, in November 1938, Jewish homes, businesses were destroyed, which was the start of the Holocaust. A couple years after that, Japanese American internment began right after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, again during World War II. Before this, the United States was not involved in World War II. Sometime after, in 1945, we learned about how in January, Japanese American internment ended. And actually, in May of that same year, World War II ended. So Germany and the Nazis surrendered, and many other countries who were controlled by the Nazis were surrendering too. Despite this, one country was not surrendering, and that led to the dropping of these atomic bombs in August of that year. Let's read our nonfiction article and see what happens. ELA Masters, remember, as good readers, first, I need to make sure that I'm skimming the text to look for what the main topic of this text is. I see that the title is the atomic bomb, and both of my headings mention this bomb. Now, I'm going to scroll up and write that in my chart. The main topic looks like it is the atomic bomb. Let's add that to our Google form. What is the main topic of this text? The atomic bomb. For scholars, you can just write atomic bomb. If you need to, pause your video to type that in now. Good. Now that I have my main topic, scholars, remember that I'm reading this article because I need to build my schema, right? So I need to really be thinking about the setting, the time, and the place, as well as any important people or events. Just like our last informational text articles, I'm still also thinking about the topic sentences for each paragraph and the main idea of the text. Let's read. The atomic bomb. At the start of World War II in 1939, the atomic bomb had not yet been invented. However, scientists discovered about that time that a powerful explosion might be possible by splitting an atom. This type of bomb could destroy large cities in a single blast and would change warfare forever. ELA Masters, an atom is a tiny particle which all things are made out of. And when that atom is split, it releases a lot of energy. And in this case, in the form of a very destructive bomb. As I'm reading this paragraph, I notice that, again, my main topic is the atomic bomb, and I want to know what's so important about it. I think this second sentence tells me more details about what that bomb is. A powerful explosion might be possible by splitting an atom. This was the start of scientists discovering what kind of destruction they might be capable of. Let's keep reading. Paragraph 2. The first atomic bomb. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was exploded in the New Mexico desert. New Mexico is a state that's right near Arizona. The explosion was massive and the equivalent to 18,000 tons of dynamite. Wow. Scientists figured that the temperature at the center of the explosion was 3 times hotter than at the center of the sun. Oh my goodness, friends. I think the most important part of this section to remember is that it is about the very first atomic bomb. And this first sentence tells me where and when that bomb was exploded. The rest of the sentences give me more detail about it. Let's keep reading. Although the scientists were happy they had successfully made the bomb, they were also sad and fearful. This bomb would change the world and could cause mass destruction and death. When President Harry Truman heard of the bomb's success, he wrote, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world." ELA Masters, why do you think that scientists were sad and fearful about creating this atomic bomb? Weren't they able to succeed in their motivation? Tell me. Right, friends. Nothing like this had ever been done before. A weapon of this kind of destruction had never before been created, and they were scared of the destruction and death it would cause if it was ever dropped. I think that this first sentence accurately describes what everyone was feeling about these terrible atomic bombs. Let's keep reading. Deciding to drop the bomb. By the time the first atomic bomb had been made, Germany had already surrendered, and World War II in Europe was over. Japan was defeated as well, but would not surrender. The US was thinking about invading Japan. Army leaders figured that anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million US soldiers would die in an invasion. So President Truman decided to drop the atomic bomb instead. ELA Masters, why would President Truman decide to drop this terrible bomb we just read about when the war was already over? Tell me. Right, friends. Even though the war was already over, Japan had still refused to surrender. And President Truman thought that by dropping the atomic bomb, he would try and save the 500,000 to 1 million US soldiers that could die if they invaded Japan instead. Scholars, I think that this last sentence tells me what this whole section, decided to drop the bomb, was about. President Truman decided to do that instead of risking the lives of the American soldiers. I also think that this is a pretty important event. Are there any important people that we should probably add to our chart? Tell me. Right. President Truman. is an important person we need to remember from this text. He's the one that's decided to drop this terrible bomb. Now, let's add that to our Google form. Who decided to drop atomic bombs on Japan? President Truman. If you need to, pause your video to type that in now. Let's keep reading. Paragraph 5, Hiroshima. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb named Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. The explosion was huge. The city was destroyed and tens of thousands of people were killed. The bomb was dropped by a plane. The bomb itself was over 10 feet long and weighed about 10,000 pounds. Scholars, did we hear anything that we should add to our chart about the setting, important people, or important events? Tell me. Right. I think this first sentence, which counts as a topic sentence, also tells us a very important event that we should add to our chart. That an atomic bomb, this incredibly destructive bomb that's 3 times hotter than the sun, was actually dropped on a city in Japan called Hiroshima. This happened on August 6th, 1945. Again, going back to our timeline, after the war was over. Let's add that to our chart. On August 6th, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Can you remind me, why did President Truman and the United States decide to drop this terrible bomb? Tell me. Right. They dropped the atomic bomb on Japan because Japan refused to surrender during World War II, even though other countries decided to surrender. Can you remind me, what city did this happen in? Right. This happened in the city of Hiroshima, Japan. Let's keep reading. Paragraph 6, Nagasaki. Despite witnessing the terrible destruction of the bomb on Hiroshima, Emperor Hirohito and Japan still refused to surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, 1945, another atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. Again, the devastation was horrible. ELA Masters, did we hear anything that we should add to our chart? Tell me. Right, scholars. Another bomb was dropped, this time on another city in Japan called Nagasaki. I think that this second sentence describes an important event. Now we have a new setting, a new time and a place. A second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki in Japan. Scholars, why would the United States drop 2 bombs on Japanese cities, knowing how terribly destructive they were? Tell me. Right. Scholars, this important person, the leader of Japan, Emperor Hirohito, still refused to surrender after the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. So the United States decided to drop a second bomb on Nagasaki. Let's add that to our Google form. In what two cities were in Japan were atomic bombs dropped? Tell me. Right. In Hiroshima first on August 6th and in Nagasaki. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you need to, ELA Masters, pause your video and type those in now. Remember that spelling counts, and you should also make sure that these two proper nouns, the names of cities, have capital letters. Good. Scholars, when were atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Tell me. Right. This happened in August 1945, within just a couple days of each other. August 1945. If you need to, pause your video to type that in now. Good. Let's keep reading. It is thought that at least 135,000 people died from the Hiroshima explosion and another 70,000 in Nagasaki. Many of these people were civilians, including women and children. We know from our last readings that civilians means people who are not soldiers and have not done anything wrong. Additionally, there were thousands of people who didn't die right away, but who died months or even years later from a sickness caused by the radiation of the bomb. ELA Masters, what were the effects of the bombs on people living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Tell me. Right. Hundreds of thousands of people either died or even got sick. ELA Masters, why did people get sick after the bomb, even years later? Tell me. Right. They got sick from a sickness caused by radiation. ELA Masters, I think that these two details are equally important to understanding the effect of the atomic bombs on the people living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I highlighted both sentences because, again, they're also the first and the last sentences. Let's add that to our Google form. What was the effect of the bombs of tens of thousands of Japanese civilians or innocent people, including women and children? Sadly, scholars, they died or got sick. Let's make sure that we add that to our form. Again, the United States dropped a second bomb on Japan in Nagasaki, and thousands of people in Japan died or got sick from the bomb. Scholars, what caused thousands of other Japanese civilians to get sick months or years after the bombs were dropped? Radiation from the bomb. Radiation is a form of energy that comes from when the atom was split, and it can be harmful to humans. Let's keep reading. "6 days after the bombing of Nagasaki, Emperor Hirohito and Japan surrendered to US forces. The emperor announced this on the radio. It was the first time most Japanese had heard his voice." ELA Masters. Who was a leader of Japan who refused to surrender after the first atomic bomb, but did so after the second atomic bomb? Tell me. Right. His name was Emperor Hirohito. If you need to, pause your video to type that in now. Scholars, the topic sentence of this paragraph is the first sentence. That 6 days after the bombing of Nagasaki, Emperor Hirohito and Japan surrendered to US forces. Only after hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians either got sick or died. ELA Masters. Again, we're learning from this text that World War II was a terribly destructive time, sadly full of sickness and death. I know that while I was reading this, I had to stop and write in my historical fiction journal some feelings that I felt while I was reading what happened to those Japanese civilians. Make sure that before you move on, you spend some time reflecting, whether that's drawing or writing a sentence, or even just grabbing a blank piece of paper or a napkin if you don't have your fancy notebook. When you're finished and you've double-checked all of your answers, go ahead and click Next.